everybody. I'm Jenny Willott. For the last 10 years I've been the MP for Cardiff Central, and I'm standing again at this election. It's absolutely great to be here. There are some faces that I recognise from previous times that I've visited Panasonic. It's been really good to come back today and to show Nick what fantastic things you do here. And we've also come to launch the campaign in Wales and to talk about the election. So I am joined by Kirsty Williams, who is an Assembly member, and she's the leader of the Liberal Democrats in the National Assembly for Wales. And Nick Clegg, who I suspect I probably don't need to introduce, who is the leader of the Liberal Democrats and is the Deputy Prime Minister. And thank you all very much for being patient and waiting. And I hope you've got some challenging questions for Nick, because he is prepared to take questions on probably anything. Within reason. Yeah. So I don't know if you...
Right.
Yeah. I don't know who wants to kick off with a question for Nick.
Yeah.
I'm Graham Thomas, I'm a toolmaker at Panasonic, and my question is going to be strongly linked to manufacturing and skills. Over many decades now, we've witnessed the demise of manufacturing. Going back to the 70s, we're looking at 25% of GDP, probably down to around 12% at the current time. Massive fall through successive governments of all colours. All parties have paid, I would say, lip service to the importance of manufacturing as part of GDP. But what plans do you have in a future government to increase manufacturing as a percentage of GDP, assuming that you believe that that is a positive thing to do? That's the first question.
They've got more than one. Right.
The second question is on training.
Yeah.
I've been involved with training throughout many years. I was at Hoover at the training centre there. During the 60s and the 70s, we had a training levy, if you recall. That's the system I was trained under, whereby firms had to train a certain amount of people. If they didn't, they paid the levy. Firms of a lower head count who couldn't afford to train could draw down from that levy, which is the way that I was trained. Well, since that, and I believe it's no coincidence, since the abolition of the levy in the 80s, training has really fallen off the cliff. Would you agree it would be good to reintroduce a levy to underpin training?
Okay.
And if so, would you introduce it?
So, firstly, it's lovely to be here. Thanks so much for coming also this afternoon. The thrill of just dropping a tablet into a bucket of water in your testing centre has been a very exciting thing. I never thought I'd do that. Look, on to your question about manufacturing. Firstly, do I think it is a good thing if we have a strong manufacturing sector? Of course. I mean, I hope it's obvious why. I certainly feel that, perhaps most especially as an MP from Sheffield, a great manufacturing city itself. But I especially feel it because if you look at what's happened over the last several years, things went horribly wrong in the run-up to the crash in 2008, precisely because we over-relied on one square mile. We over-relied financial services, overheat, banking, and didn't, if you like, cherish and promote and defend those good old-fashioned virtues of designing things, manufacturing things, producing things, exporting things. And you're right. I think the share of manufacturing as a part of our total wealth stands at around 11%. 11% now. And you're also right to say that the decline in manufacturing has happened almost kind of regardless of who's been in government. In fact, manufacturing declined, I think, 3 times faster under the last Labour government than it did under Margaret Thatcher, which just shows that it's not a sort of, in a sense, one should take the party politics out of it. What can you do about it? I would say 3 things. Firstly, keep markets open. And plugged into the big marketplaces where you sell the stuff that you produce. I think you export roughly 80% of the things that you produce on this in this site. I mean, that's a great example. If we did what quite a lot of other politicians are advocating, pull the drawbridge up, turn our back on the outside world, pull ourselves out of the world's largest marketplace, the European Union. It would decimate places like this. So that's the first thing, keep ourselves open. Secondly, people, and this is in part in response to your training question. For far, far too long, we've had this sort of barely disguised snobbery that kind of assumes that an academic qualification is better than a vocational one, that having your nose in a book in a university library for 3 or 4 years is better than earning and learning and earning by doing. And I think what we need to aspire towards is to have the kind of same equality of esteem for vocational qualifications and vocational training as we do for academic training. And that's why I'm so chuffed that one of the big things we've achieved over the last half decade, despite all the difficult decisions we've had to make, including in how to finance universities, we've actually massively expanded the availability of apprenticeships. And we've had 2 million new apprenticeships start during this last 5-year Parliament. Over half of those, by the way, have been women, which is a good thing, because the gender balance of this audience is perhaps reflective of the fact that we need more women into engineering, we need more women in manufacturing, we need more women in apprenticeships. And I think we can expand that. We can expand. I reckon we can double the number of apprenticeships, most especially by encouraging smaller employers who are still a little bit reluctant to take on apprenticeships to do so. And the third thing, we should learn from other countries. I think one of the most innovative, one of the smartest things we've done is actually learn something from Germany. In Germany, they have something called Fraunhofer Institutes. And in essence, what they are, they're places where researchers and academics, people doing lab work, are on the same location as people who then actually turn what they're researching into new products. So, for instance, we've created we don't call it a Fraunhofer Institute, we call them catapult centres, and it's something that our Liberal Democrat colleague Vince Cable has been leading on in government. So, for instance, we've created a Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, Catapult Centre, in my neck of the woods, in just down the road from Sheffield in Rotherham. And it's absolutely brilliant because it means that we finally bridge that gap that has existed for so long in Britain between the kind of brain power of our laboratories and research scientists and our ability to actually then produce the products which they create. So I think we're starting to move things in the right direction. We're starting to see a bit of a rebirth in manufacturing, but we need to keep at it.
The levy?
No. Well, the way you can fund training, it doesn't have to necessarily be the old-style levy. You can do it in lots of different ways. And the fact that we have expanded apprenticeships on a scale that this country has not seen, never mind the levy, this country has not seen the number of new apprenticeships created on the scale that we've done since the Second World War. We've dramatically increased it. There's partly a contribution from employers, but there's also a very, very significant contribution from central government. So central government, we have poured money, just as we've had to make savings and cuts elsewhere. Thankfully, we've massively expanded the amount of money going into apprenticeships centrally.
Deputy Prime Minister, in a recent poll, Labour was forecast to be the largest party, looking for support from either the Lib Dems or the SNP. How do you personally feel about doing the same job under Labour? Or with Labour?
So, look, I take a really pragmatic approach to this. It's not really last time what was that if no party got an outright majority from you, then the party which nonetheless had got the kind of biggest mandate, the most votes and seats, democratic logic would dictate that that party should have the right to try and assemble a government. And last time that was clearly the Conservatives. They didn't win, but they got more votes and seats than others. And I think we should just follow the same principle. Instead of constantly trying to look into our kind of different crystal balls, and I'm asked sort of repeatedly every day to provide a running commentary on polls. I'm not a pollster. I'm a campaigning politician. I passionately believe that the right thing for this country is not for us to lurch to the left or the right. I'm very proud of the fact that our party's anchored this government in the kind of centre ground, which is where I think we should stay to complete the economic recovery, finish the job, but finish it fairly. But beyond that, in terms of what combination of parties may or may not make up the next government, that really is for you to tell us. I await your judgment. Lady here.
Okay, mine's based on the NHS.
Yeah.
Years ago, surgeries used to have an out-hours doctor on call service. The last Labour government removed that service, which has now put a lot of strain on the accident, emergency and the ambulance services. So what plans do you have to provide a doctor on call service and to take away the strain from the hospitals and the ambulance service?
Yeah. I might say a few words about the bigger picture of how we fund the NHS, but I know, Kirsty, you've got strong views on come into the microphone. So you might just want to say a few.
Well, here in Cardiff, we've got some of the longest waiting times of any accident and emergency department. So the Heath is just under so much pressure. We know that we've got worse ambulance response times than anywhere else, and that's because ambulances can't offload their patients at A&E because they can't get their patients into the beds and the wards, and the patients who need to leave the hospital can't get out because Cardiff Council aren't paying for enough social care. What we've been advocating is to try and create a little bit of space to talk about these issues without the constant slanging of politicians across the border and even within the Assembly. So what we've been trying to advocate is a commission, cross-party, no party, getting people around the table to try and find solutions to these problems, because often the paramedics, the nurses, the doctors, they know what needs to happen to make a better service for people, but the politicians actually get in the way. And we managed to convince Mark Drakeford, the health minister, that this was a good idea, but unfortunately the two other opposition parties have scuppered the plans. So that's really disappointing, because we thought we could create a space where we could actually get to grips with some of these problems. What's absolutely crucial, and Nick will talk about it, is that in England, the chief executive of the NHS has identified how much spending needs to happen in the NHS to keep it on a sustainable footing, and we're the only party that's committed to putting that money in. The way then the money comes from Westminster to Cardiff means that we'll get more money for our health service, and we're determined to put that money into the health service and to create more GPs so that they can offer services for longer hours, so that people can get in to see their GP, and also to allow them to treat more people in the community. I live in Powys, we're a long way from DGHs, so our GPs do a lot in the community, and it saves money sending them to Neville Hall. People don't want to go to the DGH, they want to stay at home, and we're finding really practical ways of doing that. And because of the commitment we've made at Westminster level, we'll have the resources in Wales to do just that.
So just on that, so there's lots of things we need to change. We need to put mental health, in my view, on the same footing as physical health. It's been a kind of poor cousin in the NHS for too long. As Kirsty alluded to, we've got far too many elderly folk in hospital beds, not able to kind of be discharged from hospital because the social care system isn't able to take them on. So we need to have social care and the hospitals working better together. But there is a question of money. I mean, in an ageing population with more and more people living longer, which is great, but therefore living longer with long-term kind of, conditions associated with ageing, we also need to keep up with giving the NHS the right amount of money. And as Kirsty said, the guy who runs NHS England has calculated that we need about £8 billion of extra money by the last year of the next Parliament. We've published a plan today about how you do that. You do that partly by carrying on with some of the recent increases that this government has announced. So you may have heard a couple of weeks ago I announced £1.25 billion extra to transform children and adolescent mental health services. We've got to keep that. We will have to change some taxes, which will affect the wealthiest. So we will get rid of some of the reliefs and exemptions in capital gains tax. We would scrap the Conservatives' unmarried couple tax penalty. Well, no, they call it, but I think it's a penalty against. Anyway, but never mind. That saves you some money, and then basically, once you've wiped the slate clean, once you've dealt with the deficit, we believe you need to start spending money on health, on public services, in line with the growth of the economy. That gets you to the 8 billion. And I think it's really, really important, as Kirsty said, for something as precious as the NHS, if we can move forward on a cross-party basis, it really, really would be great. And that's why I very much hope, they haven't done it so far, that over the next 6 weeks, Ed Miliband and David Cameron will come clean about how they will also meet that £8 billion funding gap. Yep, gentleman here. Do you want to just wait for the...
I'd just like to know your opinion in 2015 about the use of nuclear energy compared to your manifesto in 2010. So which is the way forward?
So as a party, that we are not sort of, we're not on sustainable, affordable nuclear energy, but it must be done in a way that doesn't fleece the taxpayer, because the nuclear industry has got a bit of a pattern around the world of costing a lot more than is originally projected. It needs to be safe. Nuclear waste needs to be properly disposed of. But as long as those conditions can be met, and we're absolutely convinced that it is both affordable, that it is safe, and that it won't create, if you like, liabilities and problems for future generations, we're not opposing it in all circumstances. Look, what we need as a country, in essence, we need to move away from where we were in the past, which was over-reliance on, fossil fuels. And particularly over-reliance on oil and gas imports from sometimes pretty unstable or dodgy parts of the world. And we need to move towards a place where we can produce more of our own energy in a green and sustainable way. It's why we're such big advocates as a party of the tidal lagoon, the Cardiff tidal lagoon, which could create a lot of jobs here, create a lot of electricity for homes and businesses around here. It would also put us in a kind of cutting-edge position as one of the leading nations in tidal lagoon technology. So, we believe in offshore wind, we believe in renewable energy, combined heat and power. We believe in nuclear in the right circumstances. We believe in the tidal lagoon. You need to just basically, I think as a country, we need to spread our bets in a smarter way and in a more sustainable way than we have done in the past. Do you agree with that or not?
Yeah.
No, but just I'm just quite interested. Hands up here who is against nuclear power under any circumstance. Right. I'm a bit of a minority on this one. No, doesn't mean you're... I sense that. One more from anybody? Who wants to... gentleman here?
Yeah. How can you persuade people to vote Lib Dem as opposed to voting Labour purely as an anti-Conservative vote, and vice versa for those who fear a return to the Labour would put us in a worsening deficit over overspending again?
So, look, first things first, I'm not pretending, I wish it were otherwise, I'm not pretending to you that I think I'm going to be Prime Minister on May the 8th and the Liberal Democrats are going to get a whopping great big majority to do exactly what we want in the next Parliament. We're not pretending that. You're all too smart for that. Ed Miliband and David Cameron, they might come and visit you, they'll tell you that they think they're going to get a majority. I think in their heart of hearts they know they're not. And I think most people know they're not, right? So the question is not who gets a sort of slam dunk result, where one party can run everything in the way that they want. The question is, how do we make sure that you have the right kind of people around the table in Westminster and around the government doing responsible, fair things for the country? And it is our view, as you can imagine, that both the Labour and the Conservative parties would pose serious risks to the economy if they were to do what they want on their own. The Labour Party would borrow, by our calculations, they'd borrow £70 billion more than we think is needed. 70 billion quid. That's more than we spend on schools and all of policing across the whole of the UK. And the Conservative Party, for purely ideological reasons, want to cut much, much more than is needed to balance the books. They want to cut about £50 billion more than is needed. And worse than that, they want to take 12 billion quid only from the working age poor, which will hit the disabled, families with kids, and so on. And they're not asking the Conservatives, which is odd, because this is actually what we did in government together. They're not asking the wealthiest to pay a single extra penny through the tax system in the ongoing effort of balancing the books. So we kind of think, it's not a great choice, that. So either too much borrowing on the one hand or too much cutting on the other. We think there's a much there's a balanced, sensible way forward where you balance the books, but balance them sensibly, you finish the job and finish it fairly. And under our plans, you'd get rid of the deficit, you'd wipe the slate clean for our kids and our grandkids by 2017, 2018, and then you'd be able to start investing again in the NHS in the way that you need in the latter part of the next Parliament. Now, I want to win that argument during the next 6 weeks, but obviously, I think the more Lib Dem MPs there are, like brilliant MPs like Jenny, the more likely it is that sensible approach that sensible approach to kind of balancing the books but doing it fairly and not swinging to one, not lurching to right or left, the more that will prevail, which I think is the right thing for our country.
So you think the coalition we've had in the last 5 years has been a success in that respect?
I do actually. Yes, of course I do. Of course I do. I know that the coalition government has had its remember what it was like in May 2010. I sometimes think people don't. We could have been Greece. We really could have. It was about just over 2%. Our bank. And I really do think, yes, of course, it cost our party some standing in the national opinion polls. Of course, I'm not silly. I realise that. It's a controversial thing to do. Some people just don't like the fact at all we went into coalition at all. But if we hadn't done that, it was quite a plucky, brave thing to do. I'm absolutely convinced there would be more unemployment, interest rates would be higher, people would be struggling to pay for their mortgages, and you wouldn't now have more people in work than ever before, and at least a renewed sense of optimism about the future. Is everything perfect? Of course it isn't. Is every decision we've taken absolutely brilliant and impeccable? No, of course not. But if you look where we were 5 years ago, no one would have guessed 5 years ago. Firstly, the government would see it through. Secondly, that the Lib Dems, that we remain as gritty as we have done and kind of stand up to all the pressures. But thirdly, much more importantly, no one would have predicted that by now Britain would be one of the fastest growing economies in the developed world. And I just don't want us to squander all of that. Because all of that can very quickly be thrown into reverse. I'll take one more question and then, yeah.
Is it about time the government put the brakes on the spiralling housing market? The way I see the Help to Buy scheme has probably inflated the cost of housing at the taxpayer's expense. I know you've proposed a rent to buy scheme, I think, rent to own. Just wondering if you could outline that, how that would work and how it could be funded possibly.
Yeah. So I've been gesticulating. I'll be very, very brief.
Yeah,
You're absolutely right. There's no point giving people incentives to buy homes if you don't also build more. So I mean, it can get all very complicated and techy, but in a nutshell, our problem has been that we just don't build enough homes as a nation and haven't done for and it's a bit like the gentleman's question about manufacturing. It's not a party political point, because no government of any persuasion has built enough homes, well, certainly not since the 50s. You need to build about 250,000, 300,000 homes every year over a sustained period of time to start bringing the supply of new homes into line with the number of people who want to buy new homes. Lots of different ways you can do that. So we're big advocates, for instance, of garden cities, well-planned, green, proper, large settlements, so you get away from this endless kind of argy-bargy about a little infill development here or a little planning dispute there. The rent-to-own scheme is a really smart idea where basically you get young people, you allow young people to get their feet on the first rung of the property ladder through renting, so they don't have to find the deposit to buy a home, and every time they pay a rent at market rents, they gain more of a share of ownership in their home. But we would do that in a way that would give the housing associations the incentive to build the homes under that rent-to-own scheme. So it also acts as an incentive to build homes. But there are other ways. I think we need to give local communities and local authorities more financial freedom to build homes. The central government can actually sometimes just borrow a bit of money and spend it on housing where that obviously isn't being done by the market. One way or another, we can get there. We're building, I think I'm right in saying we're building around 150,000 new homes a year at the moment, which is better than it was, but we need to go a lot further. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm being rushed off. Thank you.